Hey everybody, so I was looking over some of my inspirational notes for Brother Size, things that I was focusing on before we even got to rehearsal, and I was reading a book about Langston Hughes' life, great African-American poet from the Harlem Renaissance days, and his poem Harlem actually is where the title Raisin in the Sun comes from. Lorraine Hansberry took that poem called Harlem. And according to him, Federico Garcia Lorca said, and he said this about art and poetry in particular, and he said, the poem, the song, the picture is only water drawn from the well of the people, and it should be given back to them in a cup of beauty so that they may drink, and in drinking, understand themselves. And for me, that's kind of what this is all about as far as trying to create theater for me, is I feel that it's a gift to be able to tell stories about us, to reflect us back to each other. And ultimately, I think the purpose of art is to help us find our shared humanity, the things that go beyond color, go beyond class, go beyond religion. And for me, that's what good art does. And I think that's what this play, The Brother Size, does, in spite of the fact that it's about these very specific men in their very specific circumstance, with their very specific experience. As Tarell Alvin McCraney said, it's about the bond of brotherhood. And I think we all as human beings can relate to what it means to love someone as a brother, as a sister, and the sacrifices that people make for the ones that they love. So for me, that's what I took away from Brother Size, is this ultimate sacrifice that the older brother Ogun makes to allow his brother a moment to breathe in what might be perceived as freedom, but for them it's the only kind of freedom they can get, right? So that's why I wanted to read that.
Thank you.
Lorca
That was
quote.
beautiful. I'm going to want you to email it to me so I can put it above my desk. We've been in conversation, some of you who have been in our audience and familiar with our work, about producing this play as part of our 2020 season, which was canceled due to COVID. And when we moved it to this season, you've had now 2 more years with this play.
Yes.
We are in a different place than we were 2 years ago, but something that you said then, and you've said that kind of echoes something that you discussed now, is about both the specificity of that story, the specificity of the lives of those people that we get to experience that allows us to enter into it, the universal from the specific, and also your discussion back then and now with the cast, when I've been able to be in rehearsal, about our ability to present what we don't see a lot in popular culture, which is the portrayal of that relationship, that love, when there's so much else out there that doesn't center on that story. And can you talk a little bit about what it's like to be in communication with this play through its iterations here at APT, or to back it up or concertina out a little bit? You've been familiar with this play for many years now, and your connection to it is very deep. Can you talk about when you began to connect with this play?
Sure. I moved to Chicago from Minneapolis in 2010. And the first play that I saw was The Brother Size at Steppenwolf Theater. And it was in the early stages of its life. It had been done, I think, at the McCarter and maybe in New England somewhere. But I saw that production and, go back a little bit. The first thing that attracted me to theater and acting was when I was 7 or 8, I saw a PBS production of a play called Ceremonies in Dark Old Men, which was produced by the Negro Ensemble Company, starring Glenn Turman, Douglas Turner Ward, who founded the Negro Ensemble Company, which is a theater company that the most famous African-American actors have had training and have worked there, from Denzel Washington to Felicia Rashad to Samuel L. Jackson. So they did this production of Ceremonies in Dark Old Men, and this character, Theo, played by this actor Glenn Turman. If you don't know him, you should look him up. You wouldn't know him. He's been around forever. He opened something up in my heart, meaning that at 7, I was troubled. I'd kind of had a bit of a traumatic early childhood. And so I felt really isolated in the world. And something about this man's performance made me feel like I wasn't alone. Felt like I could connect to him. It felt like he saw me, even though we didn't know each other. And I couldn't articulate that at 7. But I realized that I've been chasing that feeling of feeling connected in a way that goes beyond words. And I think it's a spiritual and a human kind of connection. And so I've been searching, and I search for that every time I go to see a play, every time I go to see a movie, every time I read a poem, every time I go to the museum. I searched for that connection, and I found that connection with the Brother Size. When I saw it, I literally had to be peeled off of my seat. Everyone had left, and the ushers were like, sir, you have to go. I couldn't move. I could not move. And I thought to myself, wow. So then fast forward a few years after that, I got to be in it at the Guthrie Theatre in Minneapolis, playing the role of Elegba. And with one of my mentors, Marion McClinton, God rest his soul, who directed it. He was August Wilson's director after Lloyd Richards. And I grew even closer to it, but from the inside out. And so when we had our Winter Words a few years back, and the folks here asked me to suggest certain plays, that was the first one that I suggested, because it is everything that APT is about. And it is everything that I'm about. And what I mean by that is that I, as a Black artist, as a Black man in this country, am always looking for stories that shatter the misperceptions and the preconceptions about who we are and who we are not. And we don't get to see Black men loving each other like these brothers love each other in this play. We don't get to see the real, honest, internal, private moments with Black men that they're creating for themselves, not through the lens of someone else. And so I feel that in addition to all the other things, the industrial prison complex and all the other things that have huge impact on these men's lives, the love that they have for each other is at the core of what I feel this play is about. And so that is the thing that attracted me to it. And then when you dealt with Tarell's beautiful language, the metaphor, just the poetry, the myth, the connection to West African culture in a contemporary way, and how that kind of just was a great umbrella for our journey from Africa to this part of the world, just in terms of how our religion, the things that we held in high esteem, were taken from us, and we had to somehow mask it in other names and other words, like Santeria, like Vodun, like Candomblé in Cuba, under the guise of Christianity. So I'm talking about the Orishas, Ogun and Ochusi and Alegba, and those names that we hear, and these characters are named after these West African deities that somehow survived the Middle Passage and somehow was woven into Christianity. So for each one of these deities, there is a patron saint in Catholicism. And so all of these things about this play I felt were meaningful enough to kind of put my heart and soul on the line for, And that's, I think, what not just I am doing, but these guys on stage are giving you every ounce of their heart and soul without losing the beauty of Tarell's language. And I just feel that it's just a wonderful, wonderful step forward for us at APT to be doing Tarell's work.
Thank you. I encourage those of you who have not read the play to take a look at this play on the page. It, in fact, is written. If you are a reader of poetry, you will recognize this play as a poem when you look at it. And Gavin is as focused on language as any director I know. We have voice and text coaches that also work with these actors on language, but it is written very much. If you've read E.E. Cummings or any of those, it is written on the page. It has that beauty. And it uses the same poetic structure that Shakespeare does in many ways, in repetition, in alliteration, in all of those moments of music that come into the words of these men. It is not colloquial, it's not kitchen sink, it lives on a higher level. The way McCraney wrote that it can exist, understanding the Yoruba culture and those deities. The language can also be two men at dinner who know each other well. But if you are listening, and Gavin has been acutely aware of keeping the language as it's written on the play, it also has that heightened quality, the language as well. I'd love to talk a little bit about this production, about, if you read the play, the character of the griot, the musician, our wonderful Jamak Newberry, who you got to see in the play if you've seen the production. Can you talk to me about when the idea of including someone who might either have a percussive note to add to the production, or what the role of a griot for you might be in this world?
Right. Well, for those of us who don't know, griot is a storyteller. And coming from the West African tradition of storytelling, Tarell has fully embraced that this is a story that we are telling and that we as a community are experiencing. So he wanted to take away the kind of, let's pretend that this is really happening. Mm-hmm. We're going to tell a story, and we're going to let you know that we're telling you a story, because I'm going to tell you I'm going to enter now. Mm-hmm. And I'm upset, so I'm frowning now. And I'm sick, I'm kissing my teeth now. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to really embrace that tradition of West African storytelling. Now, this play can be done with just the three actors playing those three characters, but I think musically as a director and as an actor. And so I wanted the character, I wanted Jamak to be a storyteller, to kind of set the stage up for us without making any qualms about the fact that we are going to tell you all a story, as opposed to like, this is a naturalistic drama and we're really in this room and these things are really happening. Yet at the same time, the actors have to convince themselves in those moments that this is really happening. And that's what's so exciting but also challenging about Tarell's work, right? Because when I was talking to the actors, some of them were having trouble with, well, how can I be honest and real in the moment, but then tell the audience that when I tell the audience, then I'm stepping out of it, and that's exactly what Tarell said. Tarell said he wants actors not to play the role, but to play with the role, right? And he wants his actors to be in the moment as honestly as possible, but also to be aware of the man in the back. He has to hear what I'm saying, so it can't just be for me. It has to be for everybody. And that's what storytelling is. You know, that's what storytelling is. And so that's why I wanted Jamak to not just let us know we're going to hear a story now, but then to support the story musically. I felt like, you know, you see a good movie, and movies without music, you know, music affects you. It affects your emotions in a way that I feel nothing else can. It's a universal language. And so I wanted to bring that element of a soundscape to not only support the action, but to then have the actors play with the soundscape. As you can see, Alegba points to the musician at times to make a sound or to make a percussive sound. With full, like, we're exposing that we're telling a story, and now I'm going to tell the musicians to make a sound, but it doesn't take us out of this. It doesn't take us out of the story. I don't think it doesn't make us feel like, oh, this is just a story that they're telling. They're reciting a story. No, they're experiencing it, but we as a community are part of it. We're not separate from it, and that's one of the things that Tarell is really interested in, is having the community be a part of the experience, not just in receiving it, but then the actors can like talk to you and see what your response is, and then your response affects how they then move on with the rest of their lines, you know? So that's why I wanted Jamak in this play to, you know, it's not a written character, but other productions have had musicians just to help create that kind of percussive, polyrhythmic sound that is very specific to West African culture. These characters speak in different rhythms, right? You have Ogun, you know, he's like iron, and he builds tools, and he builds pathways and roads. You know, there's some statues of Ogun with a machete, just like chopping down trees and things to make a path. And then you have Alegba, who actually leads you to the path. That's what that Orisha is supposed. A lot of people think he's just there to trick people, and he's like this mean-spirited, evil person, but he is there to lead you to your destiny, and then it's up to you to decide which way to go, right? So Ogun, you know, they talk about Ogun as building a driveway to nowhere. Well, the driveway is actually for his brother to find a place to go so that he can be free, finally, you know. So you've got Ogun very strong and solid. You've got Alegba that's kind of smooth. Rhythmically, he talks like this and he's moving like that and the music supports that. And then you have Ochusi, the younger brother, who's just like, where do I go? What do I do? I want to do this. Just like a little brother would, right? So I think, you know, the rhythms of these characters are already written into the play, and I just wanted to enhance it with Jamak and the music and the percussive sounds, which I think he's doing a really amazing job for someone who's not a musician.
That's hard for us
We
to...
learned all that stuff through the rehearsal process. He's not a percussionist.
But I mean, about getting the right people in the room, we
Yeah.
met this particular actor and knew that he was the right spirit for the space.
Absolutely.
And then worked with Josh Schmidt, who was our composer, sound designer, and Gavin composed a lot of the music that is sung and chanted. And I'd love to talk about that aspect. Those of you who've seen the production, there is movement is a big part of this story. Can you talk a little bit about how that grew? Was it with the actors? Did you have a clear idea? The script indicates there are moments where that exists, but your invention is what we're seeing.
Yeah, well, I had ideas about the music because I love making music, and then with Russell in particular, who does all that amazing movement on the ramp while he's having the dream and the nightmare, and he's spinning around and he's convulsing and he's contracting, and we came up with that together. But he's very, very gifted physically. But I always had an idea for kind of the melodies that I wanted to use. And it's so funny, there's a scene in which Alegba enters like humming a tune. Da, da, da. And that's actually a tune that I created when we did one of the other plays in this trilogy called In the Red and Brown Water. Because The Brother Size is a part of a trilogy. In the Red and Brown Water, then The Brother Size, then another play called Marcus or The Secret of Sweet. And so I played Alegba in this production in Minneapolis, and the actor playing Alegba now heard me sing that melody. And so he came to rehearsal, and I said, well, what do you want to sing? He said, da, da, da. I said, come on, man, that's... So yeah, I had musical ideas, and then the physicality we just kind of created together. I wanted it to be a very physical show. I wanted the guys to be very demonstrative physically with who they were, because I think the physicalization helps complement the language and complement the music. So I wanted Alegba to float. I wanted him to be smooth and to float, you know, and I wanted Russell, who played Ogun, to just be strong and hard and very, very, like, fuerte. It's very physical. And then I wanted Derek, who's playing Ochusi, and that's who he is, to just be all over the place, which, as you see him rolling on that tire, he is. And he came up with that. I said, play with the tire. He said, I'm going to roll on it. I said, the costume person's concerned about you getting tire marks on your costume. He said, I can do it without getting marks on my costume, and he did. So, yeah.
Yeah, this is the people in the room, right? So how it grows around who those artists are, and it's very specifically has grown around who these artists are.
Yes.
I'd love to talk, I mean, as we're talking design, a little bit about costume, scenic, sound. We've talked a little bit about sound and movement. Can you talk a little bit about how the scenic design grew around the story? I don't know if you're aware, but now this is 2 years in the planning, but Gavin has meetings months and months before we get here with these actors to talk about how we're going to present this story and what the scenic elements and costume elements will do. And those, I mean, if we're talking costumes, the characters stay fairly simple. And then there's this character from without, Alegba, who brings in a lot of different elements. I'd love to hear about your conversations with those scenic, costume, sound, lighting artists to bring that story to us.
Yeah, well, I started first with the set. And Lawrence Moten, who was our scenic designer, who's amazing, I wanted us to create a sense of a barren land. And so those I-beams that we see, you know, can represent so many things, but they're incomplete and they're uneven. And then the floor, I wanted something to say rusty, old, mythical, because this play takes place in a mythical place called Saint-Père. There's no Saint-Père in Louisiana, but it does take place in that bayou area, right? So I wanted to create a sense of desolation, and I also wanted to make sure that we left room for the actors and the audience's imagination. So I didn't want to have a set that was naturalistic and realistic and finished and complete. And so as Lawrence and I were talking about his ideas, and then we started talking about color palettes, and that's when the costume person came in, and we had to make sure that what he was designing worked well with what the set was going to look like, which it did. But we had a lot of changes that took place, you know, as we got to opening, just in terms of what characters could actually change into, what characters needed to keep on their bodies, how was this working with the movement. Some things were a little too stiff. We had to change certain things. And so this is one of the things that I love about great costume designers. And I think Trevor was amazing because he allowed for the actors' input in how he designed the stuff. The actors went for their fittings. I'm doing this. I'm turning and I'm flipping and I'm spinning and I'm doing this. And he's like, okay, we're going to use this material for it because he won't be able to do that in that material. So that was really helpful, just kind of in us melding all the different design elements together. And then Michael Peterson, you know, is this working?
Yeah.
In and out. His lighting he was so great because I figured things out moment by moment by moment by moment with lights, and he would just try this, and I would say, no, we want this, we want that color, we don't want lightning strikes up on the scrim to make it look like a cartoon, but we do want some sense of, you know, so it was just, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it was just kind of coordinating everybody's specific kind of vision so that they complemented each other. Yeah?
There's a spareness to the design and to the writing that I think highlights those performances. And just to finish touching on design for a moment, there are moments between those scenes, if you've seen the production, where there is a sound element and a light element as we move from one part of the story to the next. Do you have any interest in talking about that?
Sure.
It is very unique to this production, and I think it's really impactful when we hear the sound of that breath of those. How is that? Just talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, the transitions.
The transitions,
and you know, I try not to make them too abstract, but basically, I wanted each transition to represent struggle and all that not being able to breathe, what that means to us in this country right now, right? So I specifically wanted each transition to have a sense of breathlessness, but also struggle. I wanted some transitions to possibly sound maybe to some people's ears like what they think a slave ship might have sounded like when black people were at the bottom of these slave ships in their own feces and excrement for months on end. So I specifically wanted to use those sounds, the grunts and the groans and the breaths and the sighs, to thread us from one scene to the next, to keep us on, yes, we're telling this beautiful story, but at the same time there is struggle, there is pain, there is death, and there's life. But that, especially as it relates to the prison complex in this country, you know, I wanted those sounds too. And so we talked with the actors and we recorded these, and I said, think about this. What might it sound like if you're in solitary confinement? What sounds might you make? What sounds might you make if you were in the bottom of a slave ship? What sounds might you make if your hands are bleeding from picking cotton? What sound might you make if you're trying to take your last breath and you're calling for your mother and no one is helping you? You know? So that's what those transitions represented to me. And I don't know how it lands on people's ears, but I hope that some of the stuff that we were trying to evoke and invoke is actually what is happening with you all as you experience those transitions, because that's what I wanted them to represent.
I've in watching it grow, have been incredibly impacted and seen the audience. It's not a moment where we get a break. So often a transition will be a place where we get a little rest In fact, what these transitions do are draw us in ways that are uncomfortable. And as you say, the specificity and what am I trying to say? Those elements continue to do what McCraney does and what you've done in this production, which is it's literal and it's mythical. That the ancestors are there and these men are here right now with their brother, with their friend, and that this play allows that to exist, and that you've insisted that this production allows it to exist. That I've seen this is my third production of this play I've been able to see. It's an extraordinary play. I've loved each production, but there's something that this one does in your hands, your insistence that we not look away from that and spend a lot of time building an actual garage. That we need to not let ourselves off the hook at any point, that this story is happening in front of us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the play exists on different levels for different people. One of the words I just kept repeating to the actors in the rehearsal process was relentless. Relentless. We have to be relentless. We cannot take a break. We have to be relentless. These sounds have to be relentless. Our drive has to be relentless. And it's really a testament to what they're doing, that an APT audience, which is 99% white, right, can see this very specific black male story, love story as far as I'm concerned, and be moved to tears because and like I said earlier, that's what I believe art should do. We find a human connection in spite of the fact that that may not be what I would do or that may not be what I would say, but I understand this man more than I had maybe before I saw the play, or that way of thinking, or that way of speaking, or using that word, right?
Since we started, can we talk about that a little bit? About doing this story here now? The different costs that is versus doing this story in a place where you might have, we've talked to the actors a bit before they came here about what the different costs are, how we're able to support those artists telling a story here for our audience.
I mean, it's a really hard question to answer because it changes every day for me in terms of what the cost is to be in Spring Green, Wisconsin. There's a cost of being in the town. There's the cost of not seeing other people who look like me. There's the cost of always feeling like I'm in a fishbowl. There's the cost of feeling like we have to be super excellent because there are lower expectations for us. There's all of that. But that's not just specific to me in Spring Green. That's specific to just us as a people in this country. And so for everyone, it's different. Some weeks I'm better. Other weeks I'm not. But I feel like this is my charge. I feel like I was given a certain amount of ability to do a certain kind of thing with, and this is where I am. And so I welcome the opportunity, but it does cost. It does cost. And I think the actors realize that because the first preview that we had was a very friendly audience, but there were a lot of people of color. And so it felt like home and it felt like church, you know? And so they got used to that. And I said, guys, don't get used to that because that's not the norm. That's the exception. It's hard. It's hard, but it's also fulfilling. And I feel like, how we move forward as a country, as a nation, as a city, as a town, as a state, it ain't gonna be easy. It's not easy stuff. It's uncomfortable, and everyone has a price to pay, if that's really what we want to achieve, which is some kind of, connection as Americans so that we can see beyond these things that, that create walls for us and that make us feel like everyone is the other. I really feel like that may sound a little like, sappy, but I really feel like we all have a price to pay. And it's going to be burdensome at times because change comes at a price, at a cost, So, yeah.
There were moments in rehearsal. One of the best parts about my extraordinary job is I get to be around while art is getting made. And I remember you saying at one point to that room, we're making this for ourselves. We are not making this for this particular audience. We are sharing this story. But that room was making you were guiding that story with those artists for yourselves.
Right.
To honor the play, to honor the story, to honor the ancestors, and we were going to have the gift of presenting it here.
Yeah.
but it wasn't shifted, changed in any way. Right. That was important to you. Those conversations were important to you with that cast.
Right, because
that
was important to the playwright.
Yeah.
Tarell wrote this play. He said, I wrote this play so they could be done on a street corner in Miami-Dade County with now costumes, props, anything, storytelling on the street corner. And so that was what I wanted to do with this production. I didn't want to think of who is watching us. I wanted us to be as honest for ourselves as possible in telling this story about us. And as I said before, and we'll say again, I feel that when people do that, when they get that true and that honest and that specific and stay true to what the writer intended, everyone gets a window to look through. Everyone gets a door to step in as an audience member to connect to the story. And so, yes, I wanted it. I didn't want the actors thinking, okay, let me fix this a little. Let me maybe not use a double negative, even though it's on the page, because we're doing this for an APT audience. Let me do the words that the playwright put on the page, the way he put it on the page, and see what happens.
When it reaches the achievement that this particular production reaches, we also had a voice and text coach on this play. Gavin is as acutely aware of voice and text as any director I know, but there comes a moment when there's a text that achieves what this one does, with these artists who are achieving what this cast does, where it's almost as if we watch the United Nations and you've got translating headphones on, that we are allowed to understand languages we've never been allowed to be on the wall. I've never been able to be in the room when that kind of intimacy occurs between two black men. Never, of course not. But in this play, with this achieving what it achieves because of this production, I feel like all of a sudden I can be fluent in that love. And that is what I think our audiences walk away from, that we are able for a moment to be fluent and to understand things that we don't have the language for from our own perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a minute. It's like Shakespeare, right?
Yeah, it is like
Shakespeare. So you
Shakespeare.
start and you're like, wait, what are you all saying? And you lean in. And all of a sudden it starts making sense. And someone said that to me about this. They said, I'm so glad that we have to lean in to get it. And we may not get every single word, but we're leaning in and we're understanding. And I love that Tarell has given us something that forces us to do that. I just think it's just genius writing. It's beautiful, beautiful. And you were talking about the language and it being similar to Shakespeare in terms of like verse and prose and the words on the page. Like Tarell will leave like blank measures, which represent either a pause or you pick it up on the next person's line. It's just really, it's like a score the way he wrote this play. It's really beautiful.
There are also those 3 soliloquies, each of those characters, and in Gavin's staging, it's very, very true to storytelling, also to how we manage to tell stories at APT, given our thrust spaces, that those characters are sharing with you their stories. And the first time I heard any words from this play was somebody did that Legba audition for me in an audition, Legba piece for me in an audition, and I left and immediately went to order the play. I'd never heard that. The sound of that man's voice clanging off the walls was immediately dropped me into the most impactful, dense, gorgeous poetry.
Yeah.
So it's the same structure that these great poetic plays from the past have employed.
Yeah.
It's
Tarell's pretty amazing. You all know he won that Oscar for Moonlight, right? He's, that big debacle with La La Land.
I think it's interesting that he wrote this play first when he was still at school at DePaul.
Yes.
And then he wrote the prequel,
right.
Red and Brown Water, and then he wrote Marcus.
Yes.
Marcus.
And so some of the characters, Alegba appears, or at least his progeny, in every one of them. Alegba appears as a little boy in the Red and Brown Water, then as a man in Brother Size. And then in the third one, it's his son that we see, Marcus, or The Secret of Sweet. So, yeah, it's pretty amazing. Maybe APT will do at least one more of them.
Maybe we will. We're getting votes. Please, write your congressman. We always try to leave a little time at the end of these discussions because I'm sure you might have questions to ask of Gavin about the production. We have a couple minutes at the end, I'd love to be able to, and can I? Oh, thank you.
Of course.
I think there's somebody. Oh.
I can project. First of all, thank you so much for bringing this play. I thought the movement was so sophisticated and so magnificent. Were there movement auditions before you could choose your cast so that you knew they had it in them?
No. I knew they could do it. No, really. We were going to create something that everyone could do, the stuff that I was going to ask them to do. So there was no movement audition.
No, I wanted to say too that the lighting from the red to the stark white for the mythic to the now we're in this moment with these people in this specific story, I thought that worked gorgeously. I've never seen light work so eloquently as it did in this play. The spots and the color and the meaning of those color transitions. So again, thank you so much. It was such a privilege. I think it's ruined for me because I think that it's permanently engraved now, and I can never see another production without saying, "Oh, but it didn't," and it should have.
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you.
I just had a question. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what each instrument meant, like that when you were designing the play, like the chimes and the beat and things like that.
Well, that's a great question. Each instrument, like the chimes meant one thing at one time and then something else at another time, right? So pretty much every time a legba entered, we had chimes and then we had a little bit of thunder and lightning because he's bringing that storm that we start with and that we finish with, you know. And then we had they call it the tongue drum with the different notes that Jamak was playing on there. And I just felt that at times had a very West African sound when he played certain notes next to other notes, you know. And I wanted that in there, you know. The cajon, which is we use it a lot in Brazil and in flamenco music also, is just a wonderfully diverse kind of percussive instrument. That was the thing he was sitting on, the box that he was sitting on, the cajon. And so I wanted to start each scene, as you were talking about the lights popping up, the lights pop up, he hits the cajon, right? Just kind of using that as a thread, you know? And then the kalimba that he played those beautifully, like, sounds like almost like a nursery rhyme at the end. He's talking about Santa Claus. Because we've had all this like harsh percussive stuff all throughout, and then we get to near the end, and to help to support the tenderness and the love between these brothers, I wanted something that sounded tender and like something that little kids would listen to before they went to bed. So it was that kind of stuff we were doing. And then there were like the bottle tops, we call them the dirty chimes, you know, because they weren't as pretty sounding as the other ones, right? And then the gong at the beginning. I just think a gong is such an ancient sound, you know, and I wanted to bookend the piece with the gong at the beginning and then the gong at the end, you know. So that's what those supposedly we were trying to create those things with them. But the chime had so many different uses for so many different moods and feels and entrances and exits. Yeah.
Gav, you also brought in that turntable. So the combination of ancient and modern music is also very much both visually in place for us and orally in place for us, that we're not in one place only ever in this play. Some of those instruments are ancient, and some of them are very specific to where this play may have been. And your choices for that music on the turntable was also very specific. Yeah.
Well, you know, I love Bob Marley, so I had some Bob Marley. Then there was Fela, who was a West African musician, you know, and then we had Angelique Kidjo singing certain songs about the Orishas, about Ogun and Elegba and Eshu, which also is another version of Elegba. So yeah, I wanted music that connected, like you just said, the ancient to the contemporary. Anybody else?
Going along with the music,
Yeah.
I was wondering if it wasn't too intrusive to ask what your direction was to the musician when he came on at the top of the show.
Well, that's a great question. We had so many different versions of the top of the show. There was one. Well, I guess our first preview. No, not our first preview. Maybe our first tech run or designer run, where he basically, in my attempt to create him as to create the storyteller, setting everything up for the story, he put everything in its place. So he moved every prop, every set piece. And I was like, Jamak was like losing 5 pounds of. I was like, okay, we're gonna just simplify it, and have the thing that to be the most sacred be the shovel, which is what he places on the floor, and that's Ogun's shovel, and that's the shovel that he's using to build the road, which we see at the end is for his brother to go down that road. So that's what that was supposed to be, just him setting it up, and him, as one of the critics got finally, that he decides like he's going to tell this story. So you see him at one point look up and decide, I'm going to tell this one. And then the music changes and he points to the drum, to the sound guy, and he creates the sound, and the guys come in dancing. And each of those dances that they're doing as they enter down the aisle, those are dances specific to those Orishas. So Ogun is doing an Ogun dance, Ochusi is doing an Ochusi dance, and Alegba is doing an Alegba dance. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a different question. Of course, you're a core actor here. You have one of the leads in Raisin in the Sun. Tell us about the challenges, though, of being a director, switching over.
It's hard.
Tell us about that transition.
Well, I am not good at compartmentalizing. I can't do more than one thing well at the same time. So when I was directing Brother Size, that's all I was focusing on, was directing Brother Size. Now, you talk about acting. I've also been asked to understudy Alegba, Ogun, and Jamak, who is our griot. And somehow artistic leadership feels that since I am involved as a director, well, of course you're going to know the lines because you're an actor too. And I'm trying to say, I'm not even thinking about it as an actor. I'm thinking about, so once we opened, then I had to start going back and looking at it as an actor, learning all of those lines, while also learning Walter Lee Younger. Thank you very much, Carey Cannon.
You're welcome. So if you want to write your congressman about that, and it's actually, this is like another bottle of wine conversation, but if you've been here, it's a small community. Spring Green is small. And we have a big group of people who come in seasonally to do this work. So many other places have many different systems to support. And we've learned a lot in COVID, where we're putting understudies in all the time. In fact, if you're seeing Rivals tonight, you will see Colleen Madden covering an actor. So what we have now is not sustainable. And Gavin's absolutely right, it's not sustainable. And we're learning that. We're trying to figure out what's next. Because bringing in a company of understudy actors, which many companies, the Goodman, the Guthrie, they have extraordinary actors, equity actors who are happy to take understudy gigs. It's good salary, you can stay at home, you have to be around, but to convince people to come to Spring Green to not be on stage, just in case, is a harder get. But I think it's a paradigm we may be moving toward.
We will.
Gavin, and I appreciate Gavin's now on tape saying that is cruel and unusual punishment, and we don't disagree. But I have to say, you took on Jamak yourself, because before we were like, we're going to have a version where we can't understudy that musician. We don't have another person in the company. We're just going to record it. And Gavin was like, you can't do that to my play. You can't possibly do that to my play. I'll understudy it. So you took that one on yourself. I got that email and I was like, okay.
That's not right. The audience doesn't know.
He's absolutely right. Point taken. That's here.
But directing was a challenge, because it's been a minute since I've directed, and so much of directing is about managing personalities. And one day you're a therapist, the next day you're a taskmaster. It just changes. So it just took a different kind of energy. And I find that it's actually, for me, harder to direct than it is to act. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
Two?
Okay, we'll get you next.
What was the meaning of the other West African names?
Which ones are you speaking of?
Agum and...
So those are orishas from the Yoruba culture, right? So in West Africa, Yoruba is the primary quote unquote religion, right? And so within that religious cosmology, we have Oludumare, which is God. And then under God, you have what some people might consider angels, right? But we call them orishas or deities. And so Ogun represents strength and iron, and he builds tools and he makes roads. Alegba, which is who Nathan played, represents a lot of things. A lot of times he's portrayed as a trickster, leading people, down the path of destruction. But he's really not that. He's actually the next person in line after God. So everyone who wants God to answer a prayer has to make a sacrifice to Elegba first. And then Elegba takes their wishes to God, right? And Ochusi is a hunter, right? And he's always searching for something. He's always looking for something. And so those are kind of the basic broad strokes of what each of those orishas represent. But it comes from the Yoruba culture of West Africa, Nigeria in particular. Yeah, you're welcome. This young lady over here.
So it sounds like you have had a relationship with the brother Sides for a long time.
Yes.
In your life.
Yes.
So is there a play out there that you hope sometime in your career that you'll be able to direct, that you want to create a relationship with, or maybe you have one?
Well, I love Tarell's writing, and he wrote a play called Head of Passes, which is based on the book of Job. And it was done in New York at the Public Theater with Felicia Rashad playing the mother. And I would love, it's Tarell, so it's very poetic, but I would love to explore what it would mean to direct that play. It's about a mother. She's the matriarch of this family, and all these ridiculous tragedies hit her. She loses this daughter, she loses this son. It's like, and her faith is tested as she loses her family. Her house is falling down around her because he sets everything kind of in a bayou in Louisiana. So there's post-Hurricane Katrina kind of vibe to it. And her house is falling apart and ceilings caving in and water's on stage. And ends the play. She's like waist deep in water and her family is gone. And she's having a conversation with God about how could he do this to her and how he's testing her faith like Job's faith was tested. So that's one of the plays that I would be interested in directing. Yeah. This one almost killed me. No, I'm just kidding. It took a lot. It took a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Gav. I want to thank you all for joining us. I hope if you haven't seen the play, will see the play. Share it with your friends. I don't think you're going to see a better production of this play. It's one of the great gifts of my job. I get to come back as much as I want, and I have. Also, if you're interested in Gavin's work and words, we have a podcast called In the Wake of Our Shadows, Black Voices, that's available on APT's YouTube channel. We're hoping to add some more voices to be in conversation with Gavin about all things theater and art in terms of Black America and what kind of stories are out there and Gavin's connection to those stories. Those conversations are really fascinating. If you haven't been able to listen, I encourage you to do so. And if you haven't seen A Raisin in the Sun, he's an awfully good actor, too.
Yeah, I'm feeling my age after that.
We played that story in a steady rain last night, so
Yeah.
I think everybody's a little stiff today, but thank you, Gav.
Yeah.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.